What's the root cause of homelessness? It's a complicated question about one of the biggest problems in Portland, but researchers think they've pinpointed the main reason people end up on the street: a lack of affordable housing.
You see these really tight housing markets, rising rents, and not enough housing for everyone.
And the extreme heat happening in Europe right now sounds a lot like what Oregon and Washington experienced last summer.
The UK is in many ways like west of the Cascades in the Pacific Northwest here.
And now our part of the world has another heat wave on the way next week. Here's the story. And welcome to The Story. I'm Ashley Korslund, in tonight for Pat Doris. By the way, all the ways to get in touch with us are at the bottom of the screen. You can email us. The address is thestory@kgw.com. Use the hashtag TheStoryKGW on Twitter or leave us a voicemail. You can call our number 503-226-5090. All right, let's start tonight with a look at our homeless crisis. You know, people end up on the streets for all different kinds of reasons. But a new study tried to find the root cause of homelessness. It reveals how the housing market plays a much bigger part in this crisis than many think. Here's Blair Best.
There's a lot of conversation around homelessness here in Portland and other parts of the Northwest, especially when it comes to what's causing it. And what researchers have found is that it's not necessarily addiction or mental health, but rather a combination of high rent prices and a lack of affordable housing. It's a crisis plaguing Portland nearly everywhere we turn.
Just trying to eat and survive. That's all I'm trying to do.
Thousands of people doing just that, surviving on the streets.
I call us the wall-less because we have no walls to hide our stuff.
I think they need more housing.
Any given night, Multnomah County, 5 per thousand people are experiencing homelessness, which is quite a high number.
Clayton Aldern is one of the researchers behind a new urban study called Homelessness is a Housing Problem. The research started back in 2019 to find the root cause of homelessness in larger metropolitan areas like Portland. Researchers say factors like poverty, unemployment, and severe mental illness are factors in the crisis. But the studies all point to one thing as the root cause: the housing market.
Basically rents and rental vacancy rates, how tight your housing market is. Those are the factors that explain variation in rates of per capita homelessness around the country.
The study looked at the 30 largest urban areas in the country and found Multnomah County to have among the lowest rental vacancy rates and highest rent prices, along with being the fourth highest when it comes to the number of people experiencing homelessness each night. The average rent in Portland is nearly $1,700 a month, which is higher than the national average.
It's below that point of stability, and you see havoc being wrought on the housing market accordingly.
So why does the housing market differ from state to state, and why are rents so high here in Portland? Aldern says the reasons are population growth and inflation.
The population booms that we've seen in places like Portland and Seattle, San Francisco, over the past couple of years, those booms haven't been met with an adequate supply response. And so you see these really tight housing markets, rising rents, and not enough housing for everyone.
But some local landlords disagree.
It's all of our crisis. It's all what can we do? And I do not see rising rents as any of the key indicators why the homeless population's grown. That's just not it.
Ron Garcia is the Director of Public Policy at the Rental Housing Alliance of Oregon, which represents about 2,000 landlords. He argues landlords are a key component to fair and affordable housing and shouldn't be to blame for the homeless crisis.
I don't really see the escalation in rent having anything to do, very little to do with the impact of homelessness.
So you don't think that because rents are so expensive, that's causing people to end up on the streets and unable to afford a place to live?
I think that if your life has put you in a position where you cannot afford basic sustenance, including housing and food, it isn't because I think it's not because the local rents have been raised. I think there's a bigger calamity happening, perhaps globally or nationally or something, but it's not because landlords have raised their rent.
So how does our county move forward? Well, according to researchers, it will take building more affordable housing to accommodate our growing homeless population. Blair Best, KGW News.
All right, let's turn now to our big story. It is quite hot outside today, around 90 degrees in the Portland area, but it's nothing compared to the extreme heat happening in Europe right now, similar to what we faced in the Pacific Northwest last summer. Portland has launched a program to install heat pumps in low-income households. As of today, they have installed 515 units, which is a lot better than a month ago, and they only had about a dozen installed. But they still have a long way to go to get to the goal of 3,000 units by the end of summer. We will keep checking on the program's progress and update you on those installation numbers. Well, in the meantime, President Biden just announced a new series of initiatives to respond to the climate crisis. One of those provides billions of dollars in funding for communities facing extreme heat. Another will help low-income Americans get access to air conditioners and cooling centers.
And this crisis impacts every aspect of our everyday life. That's why today I'm making the largest investment ever, $2.3 billion, to help communities across the country build infrastructure that's designed to withstand the full range of disasters we've been seeing up to today. Extreme heat, drought, flooding, hurricanes, tornadoes. Right now, there are millions of people suffering from extreme heat at home. So my team is also working with the state to deploy $385 million right now.
Well, this isn't just a problem in America. Right now, Europe is suffering from an intense heat wave. This week, a town in England reached 104 degrees. That's the highest ever recorded in the country. The UK is similar to the Pacific Northwest in that we're not used to extreme heat, and we're not prepared for it either. Erica Zucco from our sister station in Seattle talked to a climate scientist about that.
Their tabloids will tell you Britain is melting. Hyperbole, sure, but flights grounded on a tarmac and canceled train routes tell the truth of it. Much of Europe isn't prepared for more of this, and in some ways, neither are we.
The UK is in many ways like west of the Cascades in the Pacific Northwest here. Not many residences at all have air conditioning.
State climatologist at UW Nick Bond says the heat wave abroad is breaking records, just like last year's high temps did in Washington. That led to skyrocketing AC sales and heat-related illness. Research by UW and partner scientists shows these events could become more intense as the world warms.
The events themselves aren't necessarily going to be more frequent, but it's when they come along, when the weather pattern just is in the kind of right configuration, then they'll be that much more severe.
Abroad, there are reports of painting rails white and wrapping a bridge in foil to reduce or reflect heat. There are also local efforts to plan ahead. The Seattle City Council voted to incorporate responses to climate change into its next major comprehensive plan. It'll likely include measures like improving public transit to cut emissions and providing resources for those hit hardest by heat.
We should not stick our heads in the sand, but we can do something about this, and especially to do what we can to help the most vulnerable parts of the population.
That includes agriculture and construction workers trying to beat the heat across the nation.
Let's bring in Chief Meteorologist Matt Safino. And Matt, is the weather system that's causing the heat wave in Europe similar to the heat dome we had last summer?
It's quite similar, as a matter of fact. I think the one that we had last year was more intense, and its location was perfect for the Northwest to get our all-time record hot weather. Remember, Portland hit 116. Up in Lytton, BC, they hit 121, which is a new national record for Canada. And then the town burnt down because of a wildfire. So that was really off the charts. So Dr. Bond is exactly right. When we get these patterns, they're just more intense because the climate is hotter. The Earth's atmosphere is hotter, so our starting point is higher, and it's allowing these heat waves to become more intense. Now, let's take a look at Europe right now, and they had a very similar pattern. I'm going to point out a couple things on the map here. First of all, it's cooled off. London's hit 79 today for a high. Dublin a nice cool 66. But the heat has just pushed east a little bit. Berlin 100, 95 in Budapest, 100 in Madrid, not unusual. It gets hot down there being farther south. But I want to talk about that because what a lot of people don't realize about Northern Europe is it's shifted much farther north than North America. See this latitude line right here? That's the 50th parallel, which is north of Vancouver, BC. So to put it another way, Berlin is almost as far north as Edmonton, Canada. Okay, so it's very unusual to get hot weather like this that far north, especially when you're near an ocean. And that's what Dr. Bond meant about us being similar, or Northern Europe being similar to our weather. They're on the west side of the continent, so they typically get the cooling influence from off the ocean like that. So yes, similar, not exactly the same, but similar, and similar in the fact that we likely are seeing an impact of climate change making the weather hotter. Now, we've had hot weather down in the southern plains and in the southwest pretty much all summer, but it's migrating our way. We're going to be in the 90s Monday through Friday. We may cool off next Friday. I'm talking about next week, okay, because we've got another heat wave coming our way. I think triple digits are likely for at least a couple of days, and this is shaping up to be our hottest and longest heat wave of the year, Ashley. So still some uncertainty as to exactly which days will be the hottest, how hot we're going to get, but it's looking quite certain that we will have a heat wave next week. I don't expect it to be epic like the heat wave last year. Remember, we went 108, 112, then 116. We're not going to do that, but it is going to get hot.
Matt, thank you. Wow, that is looking very warm next week. Thanks.
We're still very much in a pandemic, with COVID cases remaining high in our area. But there's a new virus circulating you've probably heard of, monkeypox. We're asking health leaders what's happening with that disease in Oregon.
This is not spread nearly as easily as COVID-19.
When the story continues.
Hey, welcome back. Keep sending your questions and your comments to thestory@kgw.com or give us a call and leave a voicemail at 503-226-5090. All right, today Oregon health officials gave a briefing on two viruses spreading in Oregon. One, of course, is COVID. The other is monkeypox. So let's start with that one. There are currently 32 confirmed cases of monkeypox in Oregon. All of them involve men. They've been identified in Lane, Multnomah, Washington, and Clackamas counties. Now, for comparison, again, 32 cases right now. 2 weeks ago, there were just 6 cases across the state. So you might be wondering, can I quickly get a vaccine for this virus? Well, likely no, because here's the thing. Vaccine supply is extremely limited right now across the country. OHA says right now only people who have been exposed or potentially exposed to the virus are eligible to get a vaccine.
This is not spread nearly as easily as COVID-19. It does require skin-to-skin contact while someone is sick. So individuals who are developing symptoms, starting out with some initial fevers, muscle aches, tiredness, followed in days by a rash, often on the face, traveling to the limbs, maybe in the genital area, to contact a healthcare provider.
All right, let's move on to the other virus circulating around us. Yes, of course, we're still talking about COVID. OHA says BA.5 is now the dominant strain in Oregon and cases are increasing. OHA is recommending that we wear masks indoors and in crowded outdoor areas. But a big question that a lot of people have is, will kids going back to school this fall have to wear masks in class? Dr. Seidlinger says probably not, but maybe.
I don't anticipate a return to school in the fall coming with a requirement at the statewide level, but there may be several school districts that continue their mask requirement that was implemented in recent weeks due to this current surge, at least here in the Portland metro area. And so those schools will make their decisions about keeping those requirements into the fall.
Okay, one more thing. This week, OHA also announced that a fourth COVID vaccine will soon be available in Oregon. That's the Novavax vaccine. Unlike Pfizer and Moderna, those use mRNA technology, but Novavax is made in a way that's similar to other widely used vaccines like the hepatitis and shingles vaccines. Dr. Seidlinger expects this one to be available in Oregon in the next week or so. Let's turn now to a dark period in our nation's history. 80 years ago, Japanese Americans were forced out of their homes and into internment camps during World War II. It happened here in the Pacific Northwest. Stephen Redlin has a look at a new exhibit at the Oregon Historical Society, telling that story through the lens of a Pulitzer Prize-winning photographer.
We have witnessed this morning a severe bombing of Pearl Harbor.
The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor brought the United States into the Second World War. It also brought fear to the U.S. of its own Japanese American citizens.
Well, this is the 80th anniversary this year of the Japanese internment after World War II, after Pearl Harbor.
Executive Order 9066, issued by President Franklin D. Roosevelt, established the War Relocation Authority as a way to forcibly remove and incarcerate Japanese Americans. During this process, several high-profile photographers like Dorothea Lange and Ansel Adams were commissioned to document these concentration camps.
And this amazing photographic exhibit tells the story of a variety of Japanese Americans who went through the internment.
Families were moved to camps often a long way from the homes they'd grown up in.
You know, my exhibit's called Gambate, and that's this Japanese word that means never give up. You know, keep trying hard.
Pulitzer Prize-winning photographer Paul Kitagaki Jr. is the creator of this exhibit. In the 70s, Paul learned his own family had been photographed by Dorothea Lange in 1942 as they waited for a bus to take them from Oakland to a detention center.
And it was really incredible. I found this photo in the National Archives in Washington, D.C.
His family's life was changed forever.
Locked them behind barbed wires, took away their civil rights, and then, you know, guarded them with guns that were pointed in, not out.
Think, you know, how do I fit into that story? What's going on in Oregon or went on in the past?
Linda Jenkins guided fourth graders through exhibits like this that show Japanese internees returning from the camps.
We're able to come back and create a very successful life.
I think this word Gambate is their spirit of trying to rebuild everything and keep going no matter what.
In that spirit, the exhibit contrasts historic images from noted photographers like Ansel Adams with modern photos taken by Kitagaki featuring proud and free Japanese Americans.
And so we'll always remember, so we, you know, hopefully we won't do something like this again.
Beautiful photographs tells about an ugly time in Oregon history and American history, but how these families, how these individuals persevered.
At the Oregon Historical Society, I'm Stephen Redlin, KGW News.
Wow, such powerful photographs. Still ahead, a new development in a decades-long Pacific Northwest mystery.
Has this led you to a specific suspect who could have been D.B. Cooper?
Yes.
Why a researcher thinks 3 tiny particles found on the infamous hijacker's tie may crack the case when the story continues. Okay, I know a lot of people in the Pacific Northwest are super fascinated by the D.B. Cooper case. He's the guy who hijacked an airplane, demanded ransom money, and then jumped out over Southwest Washington in 1971. Nobody knows what happened to him. But now there may be a new clue that comes from Cooper's necktie. Chris Ingalls reports on the bold claim by a citizen sleuth who's been trying to solve the mystery and the science that backs him up.
It was still the beginning of the jet age. This was designed to be the Navy's first supersonic jet. This is the very first F-8 Crusader ever flown.
The Museum of Flight pays tribute to the dawn of jet-powered aviation.
Going higher, faster, further. That was kind of the mantra of the military.
With this 1955 Crusader fighter plane.
It's a very simple design, very beautiful and streamlined.
Museum spokesperson Ted Hutter says instead of aluminum, aeronautical engineers of the day used a little-known high-tech metal in jets, shown in the Crusader's design schematics. Titanium.
Right on the outside right here. This is all titanium.
The Pennsylvania company that manufactured the titanium for the Crusader, Remcrew, is suddenly a new lead in a decades-old aviation mystery.
I believe that we have identified not only the company where D.B. Cooper came from, but also the specific division within the company that D.B. Cooper came from.
Eric Eulis of Arizona has been hunting the skyjacker known as D.B. Cooper for 14 years.
I'm what you would call a private researcher investigator in the D.B. Cooper case.
Eulis's new evidence comes from something the hijacker left behind on seat 18E of the Boeing 727 before he jumped from the plane's rear door with parachutes and $200,000 ransom from the FBI. The clues are 3 microscopic particles taken from D.B. Cooper's clip-on tie, recovered right after the 1971 skyjacking from SeaTac Airport.
I have isolated 3 very specific titanium antimony particles.
Lab analysis shows 3 particles of an alloy on Cooper's tie, titanium mixed with another earth element called antimony. Eulis discovered this 1957 document showing the government granted a patent for a titanium antimony alloy to Remcrew, which manufactured cutting-edge aerospace metals, like those used on the Crusader fighting jet.
I've been looking for something that I would call tantamount to commercial DNA. The idea being that just as human DNA points to a specific individual, commercial DNA points to a specific company.
Eulis says the titanium antimony alloy on Cooper's tie links him directly to Remcrew. The idea that D.B. Cooper may have been tied to the aerospace industry is not new.
These things, I'm going to name some of them: cerium, yttrium, and strontium sulfide.
We broke the story when amateur scientist Tom Kay first discovered titanium on Cooper's tie after the FBI invited him to analyze evidence in the cold case. Kay's team lifted more than 100,000 particles from Cooper's necktie, including some that were very rare in 1971, except in places like Boeing facilities and other aerospace manufacturing plants. What does that tell you about Cooper?
The tie went with him into these manufacturing environments for sure, so he was not one of the people running the machines. He was either an engineer or a manager in one of these plants.
Eulis is the first to use Kay's data to trace the origin of the titanium antimony to Remcrew, a company that could have brought Cooper here to the Northwest.
They would actually work with the engineers at Boeing on the assembly floor. So these guys were actually on the floor, in and around the aircraft in the 1960s.
Furthermore, Eulis says Remcrew never sold titanium antimony. Perhaps the experimental alloy proved unsuitable for aviation use. So, he says the particles on Cooper's tie could only have come from someone inside the Pennsylvania company. Has this led you to a specific suspect who could have been D.B. Cooper?
Yes, it has led to a specific person that may well have been D.B. Cooper that I'm looking into that appears to check several of the boxes. I'm not releasing the person's name publicly for obvious reasons, but I'm going to continue to look into him.
Posing with DB is a popular attraction at the Museum of Flight. Just like the statue, Cooper and his secrets are standing tall for now, a 50-year history of dead ends and cold clues that have not deterred one citizen sleuth.
I am absolutely convinced that I do have D.B. Cooper's name in my possession.
Ooh, stay tuned for details on that. All right, keep sending your questions and your comments to the story at kgw.com. Still ahead, how you can help your community. For this week's Hey Help campaign, we are asking you to donate to Bags of Love. It's a Eugene-based nonprofit that supports children suffering from abuse, neglect, poverty, or homelessness. Bags of Love provides the kids essentials like clothing, toiletries, toys, books, school supplies, and blankets. If you would like to donate, just grab your phone, open the camera, and then point it right at that QR code that's on your screen, or you can go to kgw.com/heyhelp. Now, this is a micro donation drive, so feel free to give any amount that you can, no matter how small. It makes a difference. Well, that's the end of our show. Thanks so much for watching the news at 6:30.